While making this video, I did a little experiment. I asked my 5-year-old son what is his coolest toy, and he showed me this one. Yeah. Pretty cool. And then I asked him what is his favorite toy, and after searching for a while, he showed me this one. No wheels there. Yeah. Well, long story short, at one point, when we were returning from vacation, the family car broke down and we needed to call a tow truck in order to take us home. No coincidence, the tow truck looked like this one, of course. Unlike me, he was so excited about the entire experience that it stuck in his head. A few months ago, his favorite was a toy chainsaw because he helped his grandpa to cut some wood. And I can go on and on with such examples. What's the point of this story? That a product's user experience is not just about a lot of functions and cool-looking design. It's also about the sentimental association that the product creates around users' personal experiences that conduct to behavioral changes. With that in mind, what to expect in the next decade for the UX domain and for the UX process. Let's start with the definition of user experience as written on Wikipedia, from which I will extract 2 sentences. User experience may be subjective in nature to the degree that is about individual perception and thought with respect to the product or system. User experience varies dynamically, constantly modifying over time due to changing usage circumstances. So users' behavior and preferences change with time. But often, if we look close enough, these changes are predictable. And because evolution causes these behavioral changes, the good news is that UX design is still a career with a future. The bad news is that we, as product designers, need to change our behavior as well. And we all know that's easier said than done. If you're curious why certain experiences have extraordinary impact, I recommend you a book by Chip and Heath called The Power of Moments. Also, consider subscribing to the channel to find out unspoken secrets about user experience. In the 20th and early 21st century, UX discipline has evolved and took a number of shapes and applications, from Henry Ford, Don Norman to today's notoriety, from building the first cars and airplanes to creating mazes in supermarkets. All these years, as in any discipline that needs applicability, standardizing a process was inevitable. But how can you standardize something that, as seen from the definition, is so dynamic and diverse? By trial and error, of course. A generic UX process as we know it today is understand, research, analyze, design, launch and measure. Or actually research, ideate, prototype, validate, launch and measure. Or actually assume, prototype, validate, learn, build, measure. Or whatever. I find that a lot of people in or outside the UX field often get confused about all these steps and stages of the UX process. In a competition increasingly suffocated by the big ones, companies strive so hard to deliver quickly and be the first in line that they often skip some important steps. Focusing more on profits than on valuable outcomes that actually help end users, it's no coincidence that research, ideation, validation are fast-forwarded. In the last 20 years, UX process has undergone many changes, always being adapted to new types of business models that appeared with technological evolution. Let's go through the most popular UX processes today that I also had the pleasure to practice over time. Waterfall UX is the most popular one because it's often presented as the UX process. It is the origin of all the process iteration that followed. And it's part of the waterfall model, which consists of non-iterative and inflexible approach of building a product in a series of activities sequentially dependent on each other. Research in waterfall can take months or even years, and once the design is done and delivered to development, there is no turning back. Due to the lack of flexibility, this approach is increasingly rare in companies, although it is curiously the most common model of learning UX. Tim Brown, the CEO of innovation and design firm IDEO, said something like, "Instead of thinking on what to build, build in order to think." This is basically the summary of design thinking, a solution-based approach to solving problems. It is a non-linear and iterative methodology that is structured in 5 stages: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Design thinking is based on understanding users' behavior and their emotional needs, and through reframing complex problems in user-centric ways, through ideation, prototyping, and testing, innovative solutions can be reached. The lean approach has its origin in Toyota's lean manufacturing, which, according to Toyota's website, is based on 2 concepts. Judoka, a way of spotting problems and taking prompt action to correct faults at any stage in the production process, and just-in-time, which means making only what is needed when it's needed, at every stage of production, meaning no waste, consistent quality, and an even production flow. With the launch of Eric Rice's book Lean Startup in 2008, a new methodology of building products has risen. Build, measure, learn. Such a simple but effective iterative process. 5 years later, UX caught up with Lean UX by Jeff Gottolf and Josh Seiden, and UX for Lean Startup by Laura Klein. Lean UX consists of quick iterative cycles of think, make, check. This basically means that you will constantly validate whether you are building something that users will actually use in terms of usability and usefulness. Allowing fast delivery with more focus on the experience delivered, Lean UX brings balance in agile environments. Design Sprint is a mix of design thinking, Lean UX, and agile. It is a structured 5 days process with time-boxed workshops for understanding and ideation, 1 day for prototyping, and 1 day for user testing. The problem tackled through a design sprint needs to be quite big to be worth the effort. But it's a very efficient way to validate a minimal viable prototype and help companies and teams to make some vital strategic decisions for the product or for the business before investing in implementation. For a deeper understanding of the design sprint and its capabilities and how you can actually apply it step by step, I recommend the book Sprint by Jake Knapp. What is Agile? You can Google it. I'm not gonna waste your time with that now. Just keep in mind that Agile works in 2 to 4 weeks of development sprints, and at the end of each one there is a release. Like I mentioned earlier, Lean UX works great with Agile, so let's consider that a track. Now, the second track that runs in parallel is the discovery track, which doesn't necessarily follow the same cadence as Agile sprints, but still needs a proper roadmap and some feature prioritization in advance, because the results of this track will end up in the backlog of the Lean UX and Agile track. The discovery track is the product team space to do research, to apply design thinking methods, or to do a design sprint. If you are a UX team of 1, you can imagine that dual track Agile is quite hard to achieve. For more information and for the books I've mentioned, you have some links in the description. When looking at the evolution of the UX process, we see a trend towards a lean approach. Meaning cut of waste, of busy work, of non-essential things, an approach more towards exploration rather than execution, and improvement of the decision-making process. Even if things seem quite straightforward and logical most of the time, in real life we often find ourselves struggling to put all the pieces together. Sounds familiar, right? When we want to integrate one of these, let's say, modern processes into a company's workflow, we often encounter several blockages. Pushback from stakeholders, misunderstanding inside the team, unproductive cross-team collaboration, no clear roadmap, short deadlines that don't allow proper research or ideation, not enough support from other disciplines, no access to end users, not enough resources, or status quo biases. This happens because companies today still have reflexes from the Industrial Revolution, focusing on streamlining mass production through a militarized rather than a progressive approach. Analyzing the trends from the past decade to improve the way products are built, lean, agile, design thinking, design sprints, innovation workshops, I expect this trend to continue. More and more companies, smaller or larger, will adapt a rather lean approach to product development. The evolution of technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, quantum computing will expand the scope of UX, opening new opportunities and new challenges. Just keep in mind that our job as product people is to make sure that these products are built around people's real needs, solving specific topical problems and with beneficial impact on today's global issues. But returning to our battlefield, besides the lack of democracy in today's companies, one of the reasons we find it so hard to get the stakeholders on board with modern design approaches is a misperception. Namely, that we look at these processes as rigid structures, a set of tasks, instead of looking at them as frameworks or a set of rules, exercises, or tools that we can use. The process is something that we build on top of these frameworks and should be almost unique to each company. Because the process depends on four key things: the particularity of the product, the team, the execution time, and probably the most important one, conscious trade-offs. Maybe, if we look at the UX process as a product, we may just make it fit in any company workflow. Start with understanding. Talk with stakeholders, with colleagues from different departments, understand their struggles, their needs, their behavior. Research on how other companies do it, how your competitors do it. Look for data on what works and what doesn't work. Analyze all the insights and do a journey map on how the process will unfold, focusing on the essential things that make things work. Validate with PMs, with developers, with QA engineers. Design the process as you see it fit for yourself, for your team, and for the entire workflow. Start applying bits of your design process and establish some metrics to measure that will help you with future iterations. The secret is to never stop experimenting, but always do it with a specific purpose. Maybe you've heard of Pareto principle, the idea introduced by Vilfredo Pareto. I just love how that sounds. Vilfredo Pareto. Down in 1790s, which says that 20% of our efforts produce 80% of our results. So identifying and resolving a small percentage of problems can bring huge quality improvements and reduced execution time. The process needs to be built around people and their challenges, around principles and around valuable outcomes, not from cloning others' way of doing it. Also, an abrupt change that might impact a working workflow, it's almost impossible to happen, especially in larger companies. Being patient, listening, and adopting a lean approach focused on solving vital problems can lead to surprising changes. And that's what I hope to see in the next decade. A move away from this obsession with consumerism, a better filtering of all the information and opinions that exploded with the advent of social media, a more playful approach on exploring problems and solutions as children discover the world through play, a greater focus on the essence of things rather than on compromises, to do less but better. And for that, I do have a book that I recommend you, Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Great book. Wrapping up this video, I do have a question for you. How do you see the UX domain evolving in the next decade? Leave your comments in the comments. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Leave. Don't leave. Anyway. If you like this video and want to see more, you know what to do. Keep learning and always remember that playing rocks. Thanks for watching.